"Stop that engine. If it leaves the ground, people are going to die." The desperate shout sliced through the steady roar of turbines at Teterboro Airport just outside New York City, but instead of stopping the departure, every head on the private ramp snapped toward the man running across the concrete in a grease-stained mechanic's uniform. Marcus Reed had spent nearly 16 hours on the maintenance line, his Navy coveralls carrying the scent of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid, his worn work boots pounding against the pavement as a sleek Gulfstream G700 shimmered beneath the late afternoon sun. The aircraft belonged to billionaire Charles Whitmore, one of the most influential investment executives in America, and within minutes it was scheduled to depart for Washington, D.C., carrying business leaders, legal advisors, and several distinguished guests. Marcus barely noticed the polished black SUVs, the photographers gathered beyond the security fence, or the executives checking expensive watches. His eyes remained fixed on one place beneath the left engine nacelle where, only seconds earlier, he had spotted something no experienced aviation engineer could ignore. It was small, almost invisible against the metallic frame, but every instinct built through years of studying aircraft systems told him it did not belong there. He had seen enough accident investigations to recognize danger before it announced itself. He reached the wing and raised both hands. "Don't start engine 1, he yelled. "Please, somebody shut it down," a sharp voice answered before anyone else could react. "Get him away from the airplane." 4 members of the private security detail rushed forward in matching gray jackets with security stitched across their backs. Their movements were immediate and coordinated, trained to respond to any unexpected approach toward the billionaire's aircraft. Marcus stopped several feet from the polished fuselage and pointed toward the lower engine panel. "Listen to me," he pleaded, breathing hard. "There's something attached underneath the cowling. I only need 30 seconds to show you." The tallest guard, Ethan Brooks, stepped between Marcus and the aircraft with a cold expression. "Back away," he ordered. Marcus shook his head. "You don't understand. If that engine starts—" "I said back away." Marcus glanced beyond Ethan and caught sight of Charles Whitmore descending the mobile staircase, speaking quietly with his chief of staff while adjusting the cuff of his tailored Navy suit. Marcus recognized him instantly, though he doubted the billionaire would remember the face of a mechanic covered in oil stains. "Mr. Whitmore," Marcus called. "Sir, your jet isn't safe." The words echoed across the ramp, drawing the attention of pilots, flight attendants, fuel technicians, and airport personnel. Conversation stopped. Even the engines from nearby aircraft seemed distant for a heartbeat. Charles slowly turned toward the commotion, his expression unreadable beneath dark sunglasses. Ethan followed the billionaire's gaze before looking back at Marcus with growing suspicion. "You're interfering with a secured flight," he said. "Step away now." Marcus swallowed hard. Every passing second tightened the knot in his chest. He could almost hear the ticking clock inside his own mind. Once those turbines reached operating speed, it might already be too late. "I'm not trying to interfere," Marcus said carefully. "I'm trying to save everyone on that airplane." A few executives exchanged doubtful looks. Someone near the boarding stairs muttered, "Who is this guy?" Another answered with a shrug. "Just one of the mechanics." Marcus ignored them. He took one cautious step forward and lifted a grease-marked hand toward the engine. "Please," he said, his voice steadier now despite the tension surrounding him. "Let me show you what I found." Ethan's face hardened. "He's trying to touch the aircraft again." The security team immediately closed the distance, blocking Marcus from moving any closer, as airport workers watched in stunned silence. Charles Whitmore remained completely still at the foot of the stairs, saying nothing at all. While the afternoon wind carried the scent of aviation fuel across the runway, and the polished Gulfstream waited motionless beneath a sky that looked far too peaceful for the danger Marcus believed was only moments away. Marcus Reed did not argue. He slowly lowered his hands, keeping his eyes locked on the silent Gulfstream as though every second carried invisible weight. The afternoon breeze tugged at the loose sleeves of his weathered coveralls, while airport service vehicles rolled across distant taxiways, unaware that his entire focus had narrowed to a single section beneath the left engine. He knew exactly what he had seen because he had spent more than 20 years studying aircraft structures, engine vibration, and accident reports that most mechanics never even read. The badge clipped inside his pocket identified him as a contract maintenance technician for the week. Nothing more. and that was all anyone standing on the ramp believed he was. None of them knew that Marcus had once graduated at the top of his aerospace engineering class at Purdue University, before serving years inside specialized aviation safety programs that rarely appeared in public records. Few people understood why a man with those credentials sometimes chose to wear stained work clothes instead of tailored suits. Marcus preferred it that way because machines never cared about titles, only precision. Earlier that afternoon, he had arrived before sunrise to complete a routine inspection after another maintenance crew reported a minor hydraulic warning. Every checklist had matched the aircraft logs until he noticed something unusual near an access panel that should have shown fresh factory seals. Instead, one fastener carried tiny scrape marks made by a specialized tool. Most people would never notice them. Marcus did. Curiosity became concern when he removed a flashlight from his toolbox and examined the lower engine compartment through a narrow inspection opening. Hidden behind wiring bundles sat a compact device secured with industrial adhesive and a thin carbon bracket designed to blend into the aircraft structure. It looked almost professional, almost invisible, yet entirely unauthorized. Marcus immediately closed the panel without disturbing anything. His pulse quickened because he had reviewed enough sabotage investigations to recognize that no certified maintenance team would install an unidentified component inside an engine assembly. Company procedure required reporting the discovery through airport operations, but the departure countdown had already begun. Fuel trucks had disconnected. Catering crews had cleared the ramp. Flight attendants were welcoming passengers. Every minute reduced the chance of stopping the airplane before engine start. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed the maintenance supervisor. The call went unanswered. He tried airport operations next. Busy. He flagged another technician driving a utility cart. "Please tell dispatch to stop Flight 701, Marcus said urgently. The younger mechanic looked confused. "They are already boarding. You need authorization. There is no time for paperwork." Marcus started running before the conversation even ended. Behind him, the younger mechanic shouted, "Marcus, wait!" But he kept moving, weaving past baggage carts and fuel hoses until he reached the restricted security line. 2 uniformed guards blocked his path. "Employee identification," one demanded. Marcus presented his airport credentials while pointing toward the aircraft. "That jet cannot leave. There is an unauthorized device under the engine." One guard frowned at the screen before handing back the badge. "Maintenance issues go through operations. Operations is not answering." "Then wait." Marcus looked beyond them and saw the flight crew beginning final departure procedures. The captain had already climbed into the cockpit. The auxiliary power unit hummed steadily through the afternoon air. He knew exactly what came next. Battery checks, engine sequence, taxi clearance. He looked back at the guards. "If I wait, it could be too late." Neither man moved. Marcus took a slow breath, made his decision, and stepped around the security barrier the instant another airport vehicle passed between them. He did not run because he wanted attention. He ran because every lesson he had ever learned about aviation safety told him that hesitation had destroyed more airplanes than panic ever could. As the polished Gulf Stream reflected the golden sunlight across the ramp, Marcus Reed accepted that every person watching him would probably misunderstand exactly why he refused to stop. Charles Whitmore stood beside the boarding stairs without raising his voice, yet the quiet around him carried more authority than shouting ever could. At 61 years old, he had built Whitmore Capital into one of the largest investment firms in the country, and people around him had learned that schedules were never to be interrupted. His Gulfstream was scheduled to depart for Washington, District of Columbia, in less than 12 minutes for a closed meeting involving infrastructure financing, federal transportation contracts, and several high-profile investors whose calendars had been coordinated for months. Every delay carried a price measured in millions of dollars, and everyone on the ramp understood it. His executive assistant, Laura Bennett, stepped closer with a tablet in her hands. "Sir, we are still on schedule. The captain is requesting clearance to begin final engine procedures." Charles gave a brief nod without taking his eyes off Marcus. "What is maintenance saying?" Before Laura could answer, Ethan Brooks spoke first. "There is no maintenance issue, sir. This employee ignored security instructions and attempted to approach the aircraft after boarding had already begun." Charles looked at Marcus from nearly 40 feet away. The mechanic did not appear angry. He did not appear frightened. He looked frustrated, almost desperate, like someone trying to warn strangers about a danger they refused to see. Charles had spent decades reading people across negotiation tables. Confidence, deception, panic, and greed usually revealed themselves within seconds. What unsettled him now was that Marcus showed none of those expressions. Instead, there was only urgency. Ethan folded his arms. "We searched the area around the aircraft before your arrival. Everything was secure," Marcus answered before Charles could speak. "Then whoever placed it knew exactly where not to leave fingerprints." Several executives exchanged puzzled glances. One attorney whispered, "Placed what?" Marcus met Charles's eyes across the polished concrete. "An unauthorized device beneath your left engine, sir." Ethan shook his head. "You keep repeating the same story without evidence. The evidence is still attached to the airplane. Or you are creating an excuse because you were caught where you should not have been." The words hung heavily in the warm afternoon air. Nearby, the captain leaned halfway out of the cockpit window. "Ground crew, we are ready to begin engine start as soon as security clears the ramp." Laura looked toward Charles again. "Sir?" Charles remained silent for another moment before asking a single question. "How long have you worked here?" Marcus answered honestly. "At this airport? 4 days." A faint murmur spread through the group. Ethan almost smiled. "Exactly. Temporary contract mechanic." Marcus nodded once. "That is correct." "Then explain how someone working here less than a week suddenly discovers something every certified inspection somehow missed." Marcus took a slow breath. "Because I was not looking for routine maintenance problems. I was looking for anything that did not belong." Ethan turned slightly toward Charles. "Sir, this is exactly how distractions happen before executive departures. Someone creates confusion, delays the flight, and hopes security loses focus." Charles listened without reacting. His instincts told him the situation was becoming increasingly unusual. If Marcus truly intended harm, why would he draw attention to himself in front of dozens of witnesses instead of acting in secret? Yet if the mechanic was mistaken, delaying departure would create significant consequences for everyone involved. The polished fuselage reflected the fading afternoon sunlight, while a gentle wind carried the distant sound of another aircraft climbing into the sky. Marcus looked toward the Gulf Stream again and quietly said, "You can question me all day if you want. Just do not start that engine before someone looks underneath it." Charles studied the mechanic for several long seconds, but before he could give another instruction, the low hum of the auxiliary power unit grew louder, signaling that the cockpit crew was only moments away from beginning the next step of the departure sequence. The captain's calm voice came over the ground communication channel. "Ground personnel, we are ready to begin the engine start sequence." Those words tightened the pressure already building inside Marcus Reed's chest. He looked from the cockpit windows to the lower section of the left engine and realized he had only moments before the opportunity to inspect the suspicious device disappeared behind layers of heat, noise, and restricted safety procedures. "Please," Marcus called again, forcing himself to remain composed. "Give me 60 seconds. That is all I need." Ethan Brooks stepped forward, extending one arm to block the path. "You have already had your chance." Marcus met his eyes. "No, I had enough time to recognize a danger. I have not had enough time to prove it." Charles Whitmore remained silent, listening to both men while several passengers paused near the boarding stairs. One elderly attorney adjusted his glasses and quietly asked Laura Bennett, "What exactly is he claiming?" She answered in a whisper, "He believes someone attached an unauthorized object beneath the engine." Another passenger frowned. "Has anyone actually checked?" Ethan answered before anyone else could respond. "Our security inspection found nothing unusual. We are not delaying departure because of unsupported claims." Marcus looked directly at Charles. "Sir, I understand how important your schedule is, but aircraft do not negotiate with deadlines. They only respond to physics." Charles narrowed his eyes slightly. The sentence did not sound rehearsed. It sounded like something spoken by someone who had spent years around airplanes. Before he could ask another question, the first officer appeared in the open cockpit doorway. "Captain says we are ready whenever the ramp is clear." The auxiliary power unit continued its steady hum, echoing across the concrete like a clock counting down. Marcus could almost picture every step occurring inside the cockpit. Electrical systems stabilized, Flight controls checked. Engine ignition next. He knew there would soon be no safe way for anyone to approach the aircraft. "Listen to me," Marcus said, raising his voice just enough for everyone nearby to hear. "If I am wrong, I will accept every consequence. But if I am right and nobody checks that engine, every person boarding this airplane is accepting a risk they do not even know exists." Several airport workers exchanged uneasy looks. One baggage handler quietly muttered, "Why would anyone make something like that up?" Another replied, "I do not know, but he sounds convinced." Ethan turned toward the small gathering. "Everyone return to your duties. This situation is under control." Marcus took a careful step to the side, hoping for a clear line toward the engine without alarming anyone. Instantly, the security team shifted with him, maintaining the barrier between the mechanic and the aircraft. Marcus stopped immediately, keeping both hands visible. "I am not trying to get on the airplane," he said calmly. "I only need someone with authorization to remove one access panel." Ethan shook his head. "No one is touching this aircraft until we complete our security procedures." Marcus answered quietly, "Your security procedures are exactly why I came to you first." The words lingered in the silence. Charles studied Marcus once again. There was frustration in his face, but no hostility. His breathing was heavy from running across the ramp, yet his voice remained measured, almost disciplined. He was not demanding attention. He was asking to be heard. The billionaire glanced toward the polished Gulfstream, then back at Ethan. How long would a visual inspection take? Before Marcus could answer, Ethan replied firmly. Even a brief inspection would interrupt departure, require additional documentation, and create unnecessary operational delays. There is no verified reason to justify it. Marcus slowly reached into the chest pocket of his coveralls. The security team immediately stiffened, but he only removed a small inspection flashlight and held it in the palm of his hand. "This is all I need," he said softly. "One flashlight, 1 minute, one honest look." The fading sunlight reflected across the aircraft's silver fuselage, while the quiet hum from the waiting engines seemed louder than ever, and every person standing on the private ramp realized that the next decision would determine far more than whether a flight departed on time. Marcus kept the small flashlight resting in the open palm of his hand, making no movement toward the aircraft. He knew every pair of eyes on the private ramp was watching him, measuring his words against the schedule, the security protocols, and the reputation of the billionaire standing only a few yards away. The silence lasted several long seconds before Ethan Brooks gave a short nod to the other members of the security team. "Take the flashlight," he said evenly. "Escort him away from the aircraft and notify airport police that we have an unauthorized security incident." Marcus slowly offered the flashlight without resistance. "You are making a mistake," he said quietly. "Please inspect." One of the guards accepted the flashlight, while another stepped beside Marcus. None of them raised their voices, but their firm instructions left no room for discussion. "Sir, you need to come with us." Marcus looked past them one final time at the polished Gulfstream reflecting the orange light of the setting sun. "Mr. Whitmore," he called, "I know you have no reason to trust me, but trust the airplane. It is telling us something is wrong." Charles Whitmore remained motionless, his expression difficult to read. Laura Bennett leaned closer and spoke softly. "Sir, airport police are already on their way. We can sort this out after departure if necessary," Ethan added. "Everything is under control." Marcus shook his head. "No, it is not." He allowed himself to be guided several yards away from the aircraft toward the edge of the secured ramp, where a marked airport operations vehicle had just arrived. Curious employees had begun gathering at a respectful distance. Fuel technicians paused beside their trucks. A baggage loader removed his hearing protection and whispered, "What happened?" Another worker answered, "That mechanic says somebody tampered with the engine." "Did they check?" Apparently not. The quiet conversation spread from one group to another, until almost everyone on the ramp knew some version of the story. Marcus heard fragments carried by the wind. "Temporary employee. Trying to stop the flight. Maybe he is confused. Maybe he saw something." He closed his eyes for a brief moment, replaying the image of the concealed device exactly as he had seen it. The shape, the mounting bracket, the placement near a vibration-sensitive section of the engine. His memory had never failed him during an inspection, and he refused to believe it had failed now. A uniformed airport police officer approached with calm professionalism. "Sir, I am Officer Daniel Hayes. I need you to explain exactly what you observed." Marcus answered immediately. "An unauthorized component attached beneath the left engine cowling. It appeared intentionally concealed. I requested an inspection before engine start." "Did you touch it?" "No. I identified it visually and closed the access panel exactly as I found it." Officer Hayes made a few notes before looking toward the aircraft. "Do you have any evidence besides your observation?" Marcus looked directly at him. "The evidence is still attached to the airplane. Behind them, the captain's voice again came across the radio frequency requesting permission to continue departure procedures. Ethan responded with confidence. "Security issue contained. Stand by for clearance." Marcus's shoulders sank slightly. He had exhausted every ordinary channel available to him. He had notified maintenance. He had contacted operations. He had warned security. He had spoken directly to the owner. Every decision now belonged to other people. Yet something continued to trouble him even more than the hidden device itself. Whoever installed it had understood aircraft systems well enough to avoid immediate detection. That meant this was not random vandalism. It had been planned carefully. Marcus lifted his eyes toward the cockpit windows, where the pilots completed their final checklists. The evening sky above northern New Jersey glowed with fading gold as another commercial airliner crossed high overhead, leaving a thin white trail against the blue horizon. Everything around the Gulf Stream appeared perfectly calm, almost beautiful. But Marcus knew that aviation history was filled with accidents that looked ordinary until the very last safe moment had already passed. And as he stood quietly beside the airport operations vehicle, he realized the truth might soon reveal itself whether anyone was ready to believe him or not. The airport seemed to exhale all at once as the activity around the Gulf Stream slowed into an uneasy silence. The captain remained in the cockpit awaiting final authorization, the navigation lights blinking steadily against the deepening evening sky, while long shadows stretched across the concrete. Marcus Reed sat quietly on the low curb beside the airport operations vehicle, with his hands resting on his knees. No one was questioning him now. No one was speaking to him at all. The only sounds were the distant whine of departing aircraft, the soft clicking of cooling equipment, and the occasional gust of wind carrying the unmistakable scent of jet fuel across the ramp. Officer Daniel Hayes stood nearby reviewing his notes when another white utility truck entered the secured area bearing the logo of the Federal Aviation Administration. It stopped several yards from the Gulf Stream, and two inspectors stepped out wearing reflective safety vests. Ethan Brooks frowned as they approached. "We already handled this situation," he said. The older inspector introduced himself calmly. "Richard Collins, Federal Aviation Administration. Airport operations informed us there is an unresolved report involving a possible unauthorized aircraft component. We are here to verify the condition before departure." Ethan crossed his arms. "There is no verified threat," Collins answered without changing his tone. "That is exactly what we are here to determine." Charles Whitmore looked toward the inspectors for the first time since the confrontation had begun. "How long will this take?" Collins glanced at the aircraft. "If there is nothing unusual, only a few minutes." Laura Bennett quietly leaned toward Charles. "It is probably better to allow the inspection now than answer questions later." Charles gave a slow nod. "Proceed." Ethan hesitated but stepped aside. Marcus remained seated, watching the inspectors retrieve flashlights and a compact inspection mirror from their equipment case. He did not call out or offer advice. He simply watched in complete silence. Collins walked beneath the left engine while his younger colleague knelt beside the access panel Marcus had described earlier. Neither man spoke for several seconds. The younger inspector adjusted his flashlight, then paused. "Richard," he said quietly, "can you come here?" Collins lowered himself beside the opening and looked inside. His expression changed almost immediately. The confidence of routine inspection disappeared, replaced by the focused attention of someone who had discovered something entirely unexpected. "Do not touch anything," he said. "Photograph it first." Ethan took one step forward. "What did you find?" Collins did not answer right away. Instead, he signaled for everyone to remain where they were. The younger inspector carefully photographed the concealed object from several angles before speaking in a low voice. This component is not listed anywhere in the maintenance configuration. Charles slowly removed his sunglasses. Are you saying he was correct? Collins stood and looked directly toward the billionaire. I am saying there is an unidentified object attached beneath your engine, and this aircraft will not depart until we understand exactly what it is. A wave of silence rolled across the private ramp. The baggage handlers stopped talking. The flight attendants exchanged anxious glances near the boarding stairs. Even Ethan Brooks appeared unable to find an immediate response. Marcus remained seated exactly where he was, his eyes fixed on the aircraft instead of the people surrounding it. Officer Hayes looked from the inspectors back to Marcus with growing curiosity. You recognize that from one visual inspection? Marcus answered softly. I recognized that it did not belong there. Collins slowly walked toward Marcus, studying him with unusual interest. He stopped only a few feet away and looked carefully at the mechanic's face, as though trying to remember someone from another place and another time. The older inspector's expression shifted from curiosity to unmistakable recognition. Marcus, he said almost under his breath. It cannot be. Marcus looked up, surprised for the first time that afternoon. Collins removed his safety glasses and stared at him in disbelief, while the fading sunlight reflected across the silent Gulf Stream. And in that quiet moment, it became clear that the story everyone thought they understood had only just begun. Richard Collins took another slow step toward Marcus Reed, never taking his eyes off him. I knew I recognized you, he said quietly. You disappeared after the Denver investigation. Marcus let out a slow breath. I did not disappear. I accepted a different assignment. The older inspector gave a faint smile that carried equal parts respect and disbelief. You always did prefer staying out of the spotlight. Everyone standing nearby looked from one man to the other, confused by a conversation that clearly carried years of history. Ethan Brooks finally broke the silence. You know him? Collins turned toward the security team with a look that instantly changed the atmosphere on the ramp. Know him? Every senior investigator in federal aviation safety knows Marcus Reed. The words landed with unexpected weight. Charles Whitmore looked directly at Marcus again, studying him more carefully than he had all afternoon. Collins continued without hesitation. Marcus has worked on some of the most complex aviation failure investigations in the country. His recommendations have changed inspection procedures used across the industry. Ethan frowned. He is a temporary mechanic. He is wearing temporary coveralls, Collins replied. That is not the same thing. Officer Daniel Hayes looked at Marcus with renewed curiosity. Why would someone with that background be working on a maintenance crew? Marcus answered before Collins could. Because sometimes the fastest way to find a problem is to stand where people stop paying attention. Collins nodded, as though the answer made perfect sense. His younger colleague approached carrying a tablet that displayed the inspection photographs. The unidentified device has already been sent to the Federal Technical Response Team. Initial assessment indicates it was intentionally installed and does not belong to the certified engine configuration. A quiet murmur spread across the group once again. Charles removed his sunglasses completely and looked at the image on the tablet. So my aircraft was actually compromised. That is our working conclusion, Collins answered. Until laboratory analysis is complete, this airplane is grounded. Ethan slowly lowered his gaze. The confidence that had defined his voice only minutes earlier was gone. Charles remained silent. But something about Marcus continued to pull at his memory. The mechanic's calm expression, his measured voice, even the way he stood without demanding recognition, felt strangely familiar. Have we met before? Charles finally asked. Marcus hesitated for only a moment. Yes, sir. Several years ago. Charles searched his memory but found nothing. Collins looked at him with quiet surprise. You really do not remember? Remember what? Collins folded his arms. 8 years ago, outside Denver, your charter aircraft suffered a catastrophic systems failure during an emergency landing. The investigation lasted almost a year. Charles stared at him. Images long buried beneath years of business meetings and public appearances began returning with startling clarity. Smoke, emergency lights, cold mountain air, rescue crews moving through twisted metal. Collins continued. Marcus was one of the lead aerospace engineers assigned to that investigation. He was also one of the first specialists on scene after the accident. Charles's expression slowly changed. He looked back at Marcus, seeing him for the first time instead of simply looking at him. "You were there," he whispered. Marcus nodded once. "Yes, sir," Collins spoke softly. His engineering analysis identified the mechanical failure that prevented another fleet-wide accident, and his immediate actions that day helped first responders safely reach survivors before the fuel systems became unstable. Charles remained completely still. A memory surfaced with unmistakable clarity. He remembered opening his eyes through broken glass and seeing a calm voice telling him, "Stay with us. We are getting everyone out safely." He had never known the name of the man behind that voice until now. The evening sun dipped lower beyond the airport hangars, casting long golden reflections across the motionless Gulf Stream, while every assumption made about Marcus Reed quietly collapsed into silence, leaving only the undeniable truth that the man almost everyone had dismissed had once protected the very life they were now trying to understand. Charles Whitmore took several slow steps toward Marcus Reed until only a few feet separated them. The private ramp that had been filled with confident voices only moments before had become remarkably quiet. Even the passengers waiting near the boarding stairs seemed unwilling to interrupt the silence. Charles looked directly into Marcus's eyes and spoke with a sincerity that surprised everyone standing nearby. "I owe you an apology," he said, "not only for today, but for failing to recognize the man who once helped save my life." Marcus remained calm. "You do not owe me anything for what happened years ago. Everyone on that scene was doing their job." Charles slowly shook his head. "No. There is a difference between doing a job and choosing to do what is right when no one is watching." Marcus offered a faint smile. Today was no different. Ethan Brooks stood several yards away with the rest of the security team, listening without saying a word. The confidence that had defined his posture all afternoon had disappeared, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that every judgment he had made about Marcus had been based on appearance rather than evidence. Richard Collins accepted a secure phone call and listened carefully before ending the conversation. He turned toward Officer Daniel Hayes. "The technical response team has completed the preliminary review of the photographs and engineering data. The device appears to have been deliberately installed using specialized tools. This is now a federal criminal investigation." Officer Hayes nodded immediately and began coordinating with additional law enforcement personnel arriving through the security gate. Several unmarked government vehicles rolled quietly onto the ramp with their emergency lights turned off, emphasizing professionalism instead of spectacle. Charles watched the new arrivals before returning his attention to Marcus. "You could have walked away," he said softly. "No one would have blamed you. You had already reported what you found." Marcus looked toward the motionless Gulf Stream reflecting the last golden light of the evening. "If I had walked away and that airplane had departed without another inspection, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering whether I could have prevented something terrible. I could not accept that." Charles lowered his head for a brief moment. "After everything that happened today, you still chose to protect people who doubted you," Marcus answered without hesitation. "Safety is never about deciding who deserves protection. It is about making sure everyone gets home." Those words settled over the group with unexpected force. Laura Bennett quietly wiped moisture from the corner of one eye before pretending to review messages on her tablet. Several airport employees who had watched the confrontation exchanged thoughtful glances, realizing how quickly assumptions could replace facts. Ethan finally stepped forward. His voice was noticeably quieter than before. "Mr. Reed, I judged you before I listened to you. I should have asked questions instead of making conclusions." Marcus looked at him with the same calm expression he had carried throughout the afternoon. "The important thing is that the airplane never left the ground." Ethan nodded slowly. "I will remember that." Richard Collins approached with Officer Hayes and another federal investigator. "Mr. Whitmore," Collins said, "your aircraft will remain secured as evidence until the investigation is complete. We will also need statements from everyone who was present." Charles answered immediately. "You will have my full cooperation." Officer Hayes then turned toward the members of the security team. "We also need to review every decision made during today's incident as part of the official investigation." No one argued. The evening breeze moved gently across the quiet ramp as the blinking navigation lights reflected against the polished fuselage of the grounded aircraft. Marcus slipped the borrowed inspection flashlight back into his pocket after Collins returned it with a respectful nod. For the first time since he had run across the concrete, there was no urgency left in his breathing. There was only relief that the airplane would remain exactly where it belonged until every question had been answered, and in the growing stillness of the airport, the value of one man's integrity had become impossible for anyone there to ignore. The investigation continued long after the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the New Jersey skyline, yet the private ramp no longer felt like a place driven by urgency. The Gulf Stream remained exactly where it had stopped, surrounded by investigators carefully documenting every detail while quiet conversations replaced hurried commands. Marcus Reed watched for a final moment before turning toward the maintenance building. His work boots carried the familiar sound of rubber against concrete, steady and unhurried, as though the extraordinary events of the afternoon had changed nothing about the way he carried himself. Richard Collins caught up with him near the edge of the ramp. "You are leaving already?" he asked. Marcus smiled gently. "My shift is over." Collins laughed softly. "Only you would say that after a day like this," Marcus shrugged. "Tomorrow, another airplane will need another inspection." Collins extended his hand. "The agency is grateful you trusted your instincts." Marcus shook it firmly. "I trusted the evidence." A few moments later, Charles Whitmore approached with Laura Bennett walking several steps behind him. The billionaire held a small business card between his fingers before quietly placing it into Marcus's hand. "If there is ever anything I can do for you or your family, you have only to call." Marcus looked at the card for a brief second before slipping it into his pocket. "Thank you, sir." Charles hesitated. "That is all you are going to say?" Marcus answered with the same calm voice that had never abandoned him throughout the day. "You already said the most important words. You listened before it was too late." Charles lowered his eyes. "I almost did not." Marcus looked back toward the silent aircraft. "Almost is sometimes enough when people are willing to change." Neither man spoke again for several seconds. The blinking lights on the grounded jet reflected across the polished surface of the wet pavement after a light evening mist settled over the airport. In the distance, another aircraft climbed into the darkening sky, its navigation lights slowly disappearing among the stars. Ethan Brooks walked over carrying Marcus's worn toolbox that had been left near the security checkpoint during the confusion. He placed it carefully on the ground beside him. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. Marcus nodded. "Thank you." Ethan paused before continuing. "Today reminded me that a uniform does not replace humility." Marcus lifted the heavy toolbox by its handle. Every profession teaches that lesson eventually. Ethan offered a respectful handshake, and this time Marcus accepted it without hesitation. It was not a gesture that erased mistakes. It was simply a recognition that people could choose to become better after facing the truth. As Marcus continued walking toward the employee parking lot, several maintenance workers quietly raised a hand in greeting. Some had watched everything unfold from a distance. Others only knew pieces of the story. None of them spoke loudly. None of them needed to. Respect had replaced assumption without a single demand from the man who had earned it. Charles remained standing beside the motionless Gulf Stream long after Marcus disappeared beyond the maintenance hangar. He watched the empty walkway where the mechanic had vanished into the evening, reflecting on how easily appearances had almost outweighed evidence, and how close an irreversible mistake had come to unfolding, simply because the right voice came from the wrong uniform. Laura finally stood beside him and asked softly, "What are you thinking?" Charles kept his eyes on the quiet path ahead. "I am thinking that the strongest person I met today never asked for recognition. He only asked someone to listen." The wind moved gently across the airport, carrying away the last echoes of engines preparing for other departures, while one aircraft remained safely on the ground because one man refused to ignore what his conscience and his knowledge told him was true. In the stillness that followed, no applause was heard, no speeches were given, and no celebration was needed, because sometimes the quietest ending is where justice speaks the loudest.